Joe built a trap to catch a spy. Instead, she may have built the trap that got her kidnapped. For 2 weeks, Lioness has been asking one question. Who gave Joe up to the Russians? This episode drags the prime suspect into a CIA black site, and by the end of the hour, Joe's own team believes her story. That should feel like good news? It is not, because the exact plan Joe built, the leak, the fake arrest, the whole operation she designed to smoke out Russian spies, is the same news report the Russians are now playing on a loop above her head while she is strapped to a bed in an abandoned building. Joe did not just fail to stop her kidnapping. She may have written the script for it herself. This episode of Lioness spends almost its entire runtime in the past, 6 months before Joe's kidnapping in the present day. There is no gunfight this week. Instead, you get something more dangerous. An hour of interrogations, briefings, and one plan that quietly explains everything that happens later. The present-day timeline only shows up once, right at the very end, and when it lands like a gut punch. The episode opens with Kyle and Cruz holding a woman named Alexandra in a CIA black site in Baltimore. Alexandra is the Georgetown Walk-In, a Ukrainian double agent who has been embedded inside Russian military intelligence, the SVR, since 2018. The question everyone wants answered is simple. Did Alexandra rat Joe out to the Russians? Kyle knows Alexandra has been trained to survive torture, so he does not waste time trying that. Instead, he sends his own people to locate Alexandra's mother, Olga, and her sister in Kiev. He puts the threat right on the table. If Alexandra does not talk, her family pays for it. It is the ugliest thing the good guys have done all season, and the show does not pretend otherwise. It knows exactly how dirty this moment is. And Alexandra does not break. She erupts. Her father died fighting Russia. Her brothers are still out there fighting Russia right now. She explains that she personally handed over a man named Yurimov specifically to weaken Russia from the inside. So why? She demands. Would she turn around and burn the one case officer running the mission she actually wanted to succeed? Her counter theory is the real spine of this entire episode. She believes the Russians identified Joe through a drone, a satellite, or by tracking the team at an airport, the same lead that 2 other characters, Kaitlyn and Byron, flagged the week before. Her logic is simple and chilling. If Moscow actually knew who Joe was, they would have hit her back in Ukraine, where she was exposed and vulnerable. They did not, which means they still do not even know that the Americans have Yurimov in custody. Kyle buys it. Cruz buys it. Kyle calls off the men sent after Alexandra's family. But nobody fully lets their guard down. Byron orders the team to keep tracking Alexandra's movements, because if the SVR ever realizes she has been compromised and pulled in for questioning, she becomes worthless as a double agent and possibly dead. While all of this is happening in a black site interrogation room, Joe's home life is falling apart in a quieter, more personal way. At the safe house, Joe's daughter Kate calls a family meeting and asks her own mother, point blank, to quit. Kate's logic is simple, the kind of logic only a teenager under pressure could offer with a straight face. No job means no target. If Joe was not doing this work, nobody would be coming after their family. Joe's answer becomes the episode's second major monologue, and it might be the most important speech in the whole hour. She tells her daughter that evil does not stop being evil just because you decide to surrender to it. Quitting will not take the target off her family's back. It will only mean the mission ends unfinished, with nothing gained from everything they have already sacrificed. She says she fights to protect a way of life. She has already lost people she loved to this fight, and she is not about to run from it now. It is not what her own grandfather would have expected of her. Joe's husband, Neil, hates the answer. But Neil also knows deep down that Joe is right. There is no clean way out of this life once you are this far in. As Joe leaves for the day, she quietly slips a gun into Neil's bag and orders the security detail assigned to the family to drive the girls to school personally, stay on site the entire time, and bring them home directly afterward. That single instruction sets up one of the tensest moments of the whole episode, even though, on the surface, almost nothing happens. While the security detail is driving the girls to school, they hit what looks like an ordinary, unreported accident. A large rig spread across the highway, blocking the road. The 2 officers immediately break off from the main route and reroute the girls, refusing to take any chances. No shots are fired. There is no proof that anything sinister was actually happening. Maybe it really was nothing. But that uncertainty is exactly the point the show is making. This is what Joe's family's life has become. Every traffic jam, every stalled car, every unexpected delay on the way to school is now a potential kill box. There is no such thing as an ordinary morning anymore. Not for this family, not while Joe keeps choosing to stay in the fight. Back at headquarters, the show shifts gears completely. After the tension of the black site and the quiet dread of the school run, the episode slows down just enough to hand the audience the single most important idea of the entire season. It comes wrapped in a briefing, delivered by two very different voices. And it reframes everything you thought you understood about what Joe and her team are actually fighting. Kaitlyn and Errol sit down at headquarters to lay out, in plain terms, how America's two biggest adversaries actually operate. This is not just exposition. This is the theme of the whole episode being spoken directly into the microphone. Errol starts with China. China, he explains, does not play the short game. It never has. China plays decades ahead. Investment, information theft, cash leverage poured into American infrastructure, universities, and industries so slowly and so patiently that nobody ever notices the moment it became irreversible. Errol drops one especially uncomfortable detail here. 50 years of Chinese money is woven so deeply into the American economy that Washington will not even investigate a lab it directly funded in Wuhan. That line lands hard, and it is clearly meant to. It is not a throwaway comment. It is the show telling you that the enemy does not always look like a soldier. Sometimes the enemy looks like a wire transfer. Then Errol pivots to Russia, and the contrast could not be sharper. Where China plays the long game, Russia plays the short one. Russia's entire strategy revolves around flipping people who already have access. FBI counterintelligence agents, military officials, State Department staff, sitting congressmen. Russia does not need armies when it can simply buy the right person at the right desk. It is cheaper, faster, and far harder to detect until the damage is already done. This is the moment Alexandra steps fully into the spotlight of the episode. Joe has started calling her Alexa now, a small detail that quietly signals how much trust has shifted between them since the black site confrontation. And it is Alexa who delivers the line that gives this entire episode its title, and honestly, its entire thesis. In geopolitics, she says, Russia is the wolf pack, China is the tiger, America is the bear. The wolf pack cannot kill the bear outright. The tiger cannot kill the bear outright either. And the wolf and the tiger, despite sharing a common target, will never actually hunt together. So if you cannot kill the bear, and you cannot outmuscle it, there is only one option left. You do not fight the bear, you infect it. This single metaphor becomes the skeleton the entire hour is built on, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it in every scene that follows. Alexa spells out exactly what infection looks like in practice. Disinformation campaigns. Disruption at every level of institutional trust. Honeypots used to compromise officials with access to sensitive information. Blackmail aimed not just at senators and generals, but at school boards and low-level federal employees. The kind of soft targets nobody thinks to protect because nobody thinks they matter. The disease does the killing slowly, quietly, from the inside, while the host organism barely even notices it is sick until it is too late to recover. And here is the mirror the show has been building toward all season without ever saying it outright. Joe's own family, exposed, surveilled, one unreported accident away from disaster, is itself a kind of infection. The war does not need to storm the front door. It just needs to get inside and wait. Then Alexa opens her asset list and the temperature in the room drops instantly. This is the moment the episode stops being a briefing and starts feeling like a countdown. The low-level names on Alexa's list, the school board members, the mid-tier bureaucrats, the small fish, get handed off to the FBI without much ceremony. Those cases will be quiet, contained, manageable, but the top of that list is a different story entirely. 5 sitting United States senators appear on Alexa's list, and each one is compromised in a distinct and deeply uncomfortable way. 2 of them had campaigns directly funded by Russian money that was laundered carefully enough to survive normal scrutiny, but not careful enough to survive an actual double agent's memory. One senator took a heavy, targeted investment specifically funneled into their home district, buying loyalty through local infrastructure and jobs rather than a direct bribe. One senator has a spouse running an investment firm tied directly to a known Russian fund, a relationship that gives Moscow leverage without ever having to approach the senator personally. And the 5th got what the show bluntly calls the old-fashioned treatment. A honeypot, a hidden camera, A leash that can be pulled at any moment Moscow decides it is useful. This is where Joe's real problem crystallizes, and it is a problem with no clean answer. Alexa is still embedded as an active double agent inside Russian intelligence. Byron's call from above is blunt and unemotional. Bleed her dry? Keep using her as a source for as long as she remains useful, and that means none of this explosive information about 5 sitting senators can go public. Not yet, maybe not ever. If this list leaks even slightly wrong, it doesn't just end 5 political careers. It detonates public trust in the government itself at a moment when trust is already stretched paper thin. The story would not read as 5 bad actors getting caught. It would read as proof that the entire system is compromised beyond repair, which is exactly the kind of narrative Russia wants circulating in the first place. And here is the twist within the twist. Joe does not fully trust Alexa either. Despite the passionate speech in the black site, despite the logic that held up under Kyle and Cruz's scrutiny, Joe has not forgotten that Alexa spent years successfully deceiving people far more experienced than a nervous teenager asking her mother to quit her job. So instead of simply accepting Alexa's information at face value and moving forward, Joe builds something far riskier. A trap designed to thread 2 needles at once, protect the senators' names from public exposure while simultaneously testing whether Alexa is telling the full truth step. One of Joe's plan is deceptively simple on paper and enormously dangerous in execution. She leaks a story to the press claiming the FBI has apprehended a Russian SVR agent on American soil. Crucially, the story does not name Yurimov, the actual captured spy sitting in custody, and it does not name Alexa, the actual double agent feeding intelligence. Instead, the leaked story quietly attaches itself to the unnamed honeypot woman from the senator's compromising photos. No name is given. No face is shown. Just enough detail to plant the idea that someone connected to that operation has been caught. The effect is immediate and exactly as Joe predicted. Every compromised asset across the country, every Russian handler with something to lose, starts scrambling to cover their tracks at once. The show describes it perfectly as a game of whack-a-mole, except this time, the CIA is quietly watching every single hole at once, waiting to see which one moves first. Step 2 of the plan is where things turn genuinely cold. Joe deliberately turns Alexa loose and simply watches what happens next. The theory is straightforward. Once the fake arrest story hits the news cycle, everyone on Alexa's asset list, along with every handler Alexa has ever personally interacted with, will instinctively reach out to her, either to warn her, silence her, or extract her before she can be picked up. Keitlin describes this tactic in one unforgettable line, calling it hunting mice by setting the barn on fire. And Alexa, in this metaphor, is the barn. Even Byron, arguably the coldest and most emotionally detached character in the entire show, actually pauses to flag how callous this plan really is. Using a woman who just spent an entire episode proving her loyalty as literal bait is not a small ask. But Joe does not blink. She is certain, on some instinctive level she cannot fully articulate yet, that Alexa knows more about the earlier doorstep attack on her family than she has admitted so far. And that suspicion, whether fair or not, is what pushes Joe to move forward anyway. What makes this section of the episode so unsettling is not the plan itself. Plans like this are standard operating procedure in this world. What makes it unsettling is watching Joe, the person who just delivered a passionate speech to her own daughter about fighting evil and protecting a way of life, turn around minutes later and treat a traumatized double agent as expendable leverage without a second thought. The show is not asking you to condemn Joe for this. It is asking you to notice how easily the line between protector and predator blurs once you accept that infecting the enemy is the only winning move left on the board. Joe spent this entire section learning how Russia infects its targets from the inside. By the end of it, she has become fluent in the exact same language, and she is about to use it on someone who trusted her. This is the point in the episode where every thread the show has been carefully pulling all hour finally snaps taut at once. Joe has her trap built. Alexa has been turned loose. The leaked story about a captured Russian agent is already spreading through every news cycle Moscow watches closely. And the CIA, according to Joe's plan, is supposed to be sitting quietly on every hole in the ground, watching to see which mouse panics first. On paper, this is a clean operation. In practice, it is the single riskiest bet Joe has made all season, because it depends entirely on one unproven assumption. It depends on Alexa telling the complete truth. And it depends on Joe's own read of the situation being sharper than the instincts of professional Russian intelligence officers who have spent years surviving exactly this kind of trap. The show frames this moment as a loyalty test, and it deliberately keeps the audience guessing about who is actually being tested. On the surface, it looks like Alexa is the one being tested. She is the one walking back out into the world with a target quietly painted on her back, the one whose next move will prove whether her outrage in the black site was genuine or another layer of a much longer con. But look closer, and the test cuts the other way just as sharply. Jo is also being tested here, tested on whether she can actually live with what she is doing to people who trust her, tested on whether the woman who told her daughter she fights to protect a way of life can still recognize herself in the mirror after using a traumatized double agent as bait without hesitation. The episode does not answer this question out loud. It does not need to. It simply lets the discomfort sit there, unresolved, while the plan moves forward anyway. And then, without warning, the show does something it has avoided doing for almost the entire runtime. It cuts away from the past completely and drops the audience straight into the present-day timeline, the timeline the entire episode has been quietly building toward since the very first line of the hook. Smash cut to Joe, not Alexa, not a senator, not a handler scrambling to cover his tracks. Jo herself, head, hands, and legs strapped down to a bed inside what looks like an abandoned mental hospital. The kind of building that has clearly been empty and rotting for years before someone decided it made the perfect place to disappear a person. The visual the show chooses for this moment is deliberately strange. And that strangeness is exactly why it works so well. Above Joe's restrained body hangs a drinking bird toy. The kind of cheap novelty item you might have seen on a desk or a bar decades ago, tipping forward at steady intervals and dripping a single drop of water onto her forehead each time it dips. It is almost absurd to look at, almost funny in isolation, and that absurdity is precisely the point. This is not dramatic cinematic torture. There is no interrogation lamp, no raised voices, no violence you can point to and call brutal in an obvious way. This is something colder and slower. Sleep deprivation, an old-school method, low-tech, nearly silent, and devastatingly effective over time because the human mind cannot function properly without rest, no matter how much training or willpower a person has built up over a career like Joe's. Men stand quietly in the shadows of the room, watching, saying almost nothing, simply present as a reminder that Jo is not alone and is not in control of a single second of what happens to her next. And then the show delivers its cruelest detail of the entire hour. Mounted on a television above her bed, playing on a slow, deliberate loop, is a news broadcast from exactly 6 months earlier. It is the White House press secretary calmly announcing to the American public that FBI counterintelligence has successfully apprehended a Russian SVR agent on domestic soil, with espionage charges expected not only for that agent, but for everyone that agent manipulated along the way. For a viewer who has been paying attention, that broadcast is instantly recognizable. This is not a random news clip chosen to unsettle Jo psychologically. This is Joe's own leak. This is the exact plan she personally built and executed. The fake arrest story designed to smoke out every compromised asset connected to Alexa's network, now being played back to her, on a loop, by the very people she was trying to trap. It is her own strategy, turned into a weapon and pointed directly back at her. The show lets this image breathe for a moment before cutting away entirely, ending the episode on that single frame. Jo strapped down helpless, watching her own trap confirmed in real time as the thing that likely got her captured in the first place. It is worth sitting with just how quietly devastating this final image actually is, especially compared to the louder, more violent season finales this kind of show could have leaned on instead. There is no explosion here, no last-second rescue, no triumphant score swelling underneath the frame. Just a woman strapped to a bed, a toy bird dripping water onto her forehead at a steady, maddening rhythm, and a television forcing her to relive the exact moment her own plan went out into the world. The episode's title suddenly makes complete sense once you see this final shot. America, represented by Jo throughout this hour, is the bear from Alexa's earlier metaphor. And infected is not just a description of a nation being slowly compromised from within by foreign money and manipulation. It is a literal diagnosis of what has now happened to Jo personally. She spent this entire episode learning exactly how infection works as a weapon, and by the final scene, she has become the very thing that weapon was designed to take down. What makes this ending land as hard as it does is the structure the show quietly built underneath it the entire time, without ever announcing what it was doing. The audience spent the first 3/4 of the hour completely wrapped up in tension and dread on Alexa's behalf, worried that she might be lying, worried that she might be sacrificed, worried that the plan built around her might blow up in Joe's face at the worst possible moment. Nobody was thinking about the ending revealing Joe herself as the actual victim of the very operation she personally designed and approved. That misdirection is not an accident. It is the entire architecture of the episode, built specifically to make this final reveal land as hard as it possibly can, and it absolutely succeeds. There is also a colder, more analytical read sitting quietly underneath the emotional gut punch of this ending. And it deserves real attention here because it changes how you understand everything that happens afterward. If the Russians already have Joe strapped to a bed inside an abandoned building somewhere, playing her own leaked broadcast back at her on a loop, that means they did not simply stumble onto her by pure accident or bad luck. Somewhere between the original leak going public, the fake arrest hitting every news outlet Moscow was watching closely, and Alexa quietly slipping back under Russian control as an active double agent, someone on the Russian side successfully traced the entire operation back to the specific case officer responsible for running it. In plain terms, that means Joe's own plan is very likely the exact thing that got her taken in the first place.